This is Hannah Mail back for part 4 of my multi-video series about ancient Egypt. So in part 3, I was talking about the importance of the annual Nile flood and how mostly, or at least a good chunk of the time, it kind of naturally did its thing. There wasn't a lot of human or state intervention that was needed to make sure that crops were grown and harvested. But you do have occasional either floods that the level of the flood is um too high or too low, and that produce kind of its own set of issues. I also talked about how one of the sources that you can look at for the kind of landscape of Egypt's past before a lot of the dams were put in is travel accounts of the past of people who visited Egypt, because most of the dams were put in during the 19th century or after. So the further back in time you go in terms of the date of the travel account, the more likely you are to be able to get at least a sense of that of part of that original flood cycle and kind of how it changed the landscape. So we have people going into Egypt, Westerners for business slash cultural reasons as early as the 1600s. And one of these people was Sir Henry Blount, or Blount. He went into Egypt for a business purpose, and while he was there, he did some cultural sightseeing. This account is taken from Merritt Seger Books, which is both a brick and mortar book shop that has Egyptology books that you can purchase from the owner and order from the site, but the owner has also, particularly for a lot of the older travel accounts pre 1800-ish, has scanned and digitized a lot of those accounts, and he's put those PDFs, or the owner, because I don't know if I think it's a man, but the owner has put those PDFs onto his Merritt Sager book site that you can scan and either read online or download. So this is one of the accounts that he has in his possession of the original book, and he's scanned it and put it in this PDF format. So that's where these screenshots are from. And I put page 39 in the original because when you scan particularly older accounts to PDFs, sometimes the original page numbers don't necessarily line up with the PDF page number. So this gentleman came to Egypt in 1636 or around there. At that point, you actually the main port of call for Egypt was not Cairo in terms of people coming in, but Alexandria. That's where you arrived first, and then depending on what your aims were, you either did or did not go further down into Cairo, into the Delta. So at this point, this gentleman has kind of done his initial business in Alexandria. He has in fact gone down to Cairo, ancient Memphis. Sorry, my phone is just ringing, but it's a spam call. So he has gone down into Cairo, ancient Memphis, and he is seeing basically the pyramids, or yeah, he is seeing the pyramids at Giza. So at this point in his tale, he is describing the landscape that he saw when he sailed into the Cairo port and region, and he goes a little bit into the annual Nile flood and kind of how it changes the landscape, which is why I'm reading from this particular chunk. The Nile runs along the south of the town, so town meaning Cairo, to the west, making at its first arrival a dainty little island where amongst many fine buildings stand the Nile scope, which is a little castle wherein is set a pillar with several notes declaring the inundation or the annual flood all over Egypt according to each degree, which the water reaches upon the pillar. Then they foresee the future years in increase, so they try to guess how high or low the flood waters will reach, and rate provision accordingly. The day when the flood begins is constantly the summer solstice. The increase is usually between between 4 score and 100 days. Then suddenly it abates, and by the end of November is within its narrowest banks, about a quarter of a mile broad. One of the other things to keep in mind when you're reading travel accounts, 1700s and prior-ish, is that for some reason, I don't know if it's because the way that the printing process worked or blend of the way the printing process worked and someone just did it one time and then it became the convention. But what you will find is that they repeat, like at the end of the page, they repeat the last word on the next page. So you don't actually read that first word on the next page. So like here is usually between four score. That's what they've done here is usually between 4 score. So you basically don't read that 4 score twice. So that's just like a formatting thing to kind of keep in back of your head when you're reading older travel accounts. Again, I don't know enough about it to know the particulars of why they did that, but that is a thing that you will see repeatedly come up. Then suddenly it abates. Sorry, I just have the pup that's trying to get up. Come on. And then suddenly it abates, and by the end of November is within its narrowest banks, about a quarter of a mile broad. The cause of this admirable inundation, I am not credulous enough to understand. The whole circuit of the city, i.e. Cairo in his day, seemed to me between 5 and 30 or 40 miles. A Venetian who was with me affirmed it to be much more. He proportioned Italian measure, I English. I'm just gonna go a little bit. So like here, this city is built after the Egyptian. Right, that's first. And then this part here, he is trying to relate the size of the city in his day to some European cities, particularly London. And the geography of the Nile Valley itself really helps irrigation because it basically formed a fan. So the water easily and naturally flows in and then flows out. However, and this is actually, I'm going to go back to one of the maps. Because in that map of Upper and Lower Egypt, it shows the Nile River. Okay, here we go. So this is that map of Egypt that we've looked at before, showing lower and upper. This is the Nile Delta. This is the Nile River and where it flows. So if you look at this, the green areas are areas where in ancient times the flood waters reached, meaning those were the areas that you could grow food on. In terms of modern Egypt and its geography, that is still largely the case. So even though the annual Nile flood no longer happens, they still have around the same amount of arable land that this map shows, which means that settlement sites and villages in Egypt, people have lived there for literally thousands of years because you reuse settlement sites. You reuse arable land. And so that's one of the reasons why funerary archaeology is much more developed in Egypt than settlement archaeology, because a lot of the tombs are out in the desert. They're out in areas where you can't grow food, and that's partly why they're there. The areas that you can grow food on or live on, a lot of modern villages are still there. So we can get at some settlements in ancient Egypt or parts of settlements, but you do have instances where ancient settlements or parts of ancient settlements are literally under modern villages, and there's just no way to get at them. But that's also where GPS and kind of digital scanning is coming in more and more handy, because it means that you don't necessarily have to always dig, but you can kind of get a reading of what's under the ground, even in areas that may be somewhat blocked off. So these are just images that I chose from Wiki Commons that kind of illustrate that principle. So here we have a view of the city of Elephantine, and in terms of kind of that map, Elephantine is in Upper Egypt, and it is kind of right at the kind of border edge of what in ancient times marked the end of the Egyptian state. So that's where the arrow is here. Elephantine is kind of around here. And when you're getting further down here, you're getting into the ancient Egyptian area of Kush or Nubia, and largely what is the modern territory of Sudan. So this is a shot of the port of Elephantine, or the city of Elephantine, because it's on the Nile River. So here, that's the Nile. And you have the ancient Egyptian remains here. And then you have the modern population and the needs of the people that are living in Elephantine now on the other bank. These ancient Egyptian remains also illustrate something else that makes settlement archaeology a little bit more challenging in Egypt, which is that even the fancy buildings like the palaces, their core material that they, at least for some of the time, used was mud brick. And mud brick doesn't survive all that well, as compared to stone, which is what they tended to build their tombs with. So that's why, like, what you see here like here, here, there, here. Those are all what's left of the mud brick walls that once formed parts of these complete buildings here. The site of Abydos shows the same principle, and Abydos is in Upper Egypt. So it's in, but it's further up in Upper Egypt. So it's there. And Abydos has literally been used or occupied in some way from the pre-dynastic to the 21st century. So thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, people have done stuff and used different areas of land in Abydos. And this image, also from Wiki Commons, is a really good illustration of that because it has the some basically showing some of those different stages of usage. So way in the back here, in the kind of the when you get out of the cultivation zone and you get into the desert area, that was the first part of Abydos in the pre-dynastic and early dynastic that was used. And so that's what you're seeing here in this chunk. And then you jump ahead thousands and thousands of years later to Egypt's new kingdom, and you have mortuary temples. So temples that were built to give offerings and honor the spirits of departed rulers that were built here. So these Ramses II and Seti I, I think, are two of the main mortuary temple people who put resources to building these temples at Abydos. And then you go a little bit further and you see the people that are living in Abydos now, growing food, having satellite dishes, watching TV. And so this, I just thought this was a really good encapsulation of literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years of activity in a relatively contained chunk of land. Sorry, I'm not sure what I just did there. Okay, there we go. So I've also talked about how you can look at, because part of the results of Napoleon's military slash cultural expedition into Egypt was that after he and his troops left Egypt, you have a lot of Westerners going to Egypt to further sketch and make paintings of the antiquities there. So this is from Edward Lear. It's also from Wikipedia, but this is, I think, it's either a water color or like a charcoal drawing, and it has the year and the day when he took it. But he's showing the Abydos region in like the 1860s. So yeah, it looks like a colored pencil sketch. So you see here that he put the location and the day and then the year. But this is one of those royal mortuary temples as he saw it in the 1860s. And then Wiki Commons actually has a fairly good collection of these historical images of these sites from Abydos to Thebes to Deir al-Medina. And so that's what that second link is it's the link for Wiki Commons in general for Abydos and not just one. All right, so going into that theme of continuous land use over thousands and thousands of years, this first graphic is a graphic from the Digital Egypt for University site. And it is a schematic of two main periods of use of Abydos. So the pre-dynastic to early dynastic, and then the Middle Kingdom. And a little bit beyond that, because we have some of the non-royal cemeteries in there as well that were used post New Kingdom. So Abydos starts out being used again, the kind of first state use of the Abydos region is this desert area here. And that area is used for royal tombs, like where the tombs where the actual rulers were buried, and then the so-called royal enclosures. So we're not exactly sure what function the royal enclosures served. They're definitely connected to the early dynastic, or to the pre-dynastic and early dynastic royal tombs. How exactly they were used is something that is still being figured out. But that's why they're the royal enclosures, because it's not clear, like, were they used for burial ceremonies? Like, did they have burial ceremonies in the royal enclosures? And then, like, the rulers were interred in the royal tombs here? Did they do something else? Because one of the things that we seem to see with the royal enclosures is however they were used, that use was they were either buried or taken down soon after whatever use that was finished. And so we don't have a lot of intact royal enclosures. We have like one we have one main one, which was like one of the very last ones to be built. And then also at the very edge of the floodplain, we have people living in Abydos and a town just naturally growing up into developing. And then we have from that town, people died that weren't royal and they needed to be buried somewhere. So that's where we get these middle cemeteries and then these northern cemeteries. So we have these kind of elite areas, and then the kind of more regular living space that sort of organically naturally develops, and then the kind of non-royal cemeteries that see use all the way past New Kingdom. And then thousands of years later, when you get to the Middle Kingdom, you have the more state resources are directed towards Abydos, not necessarily for the actual royal tombs or burials, but for royal mortuary complexes. So the temples that were designed to give offerings and honor to the spirit of the rulers who died, but it's not necessarily all the royal graves from the rulers of the Middle Kingdom. So that's why like this says buildings of the Middle Kingdom, because it's including those Middle Kingdom royal mortuary complexes. And then because of course you need personnel and people and staff to run those, one of the things that the state did in the Middle Kingdom is they put resources during the 12th dynasty to building a purpose-built town for the people who worked in these royal mortuary complexes to actually live in, which is why you have the kind of earlier town that sort of organically grew and organically developed, and then you have the state-founded town of the 12th dynasty and after. So this, in terms of, because this second graphic is a graphic from Just Door, and the organic town, this is a more close up and detailed view of this kind of chunk here. And then, like I said, this Abydos was used all the way past the New Kingdom. So then there's remains of a late period enclosure wall there. And then the New Kingdom usages also, or at least partly, those royal mortuary temples, which in that graphic is this general area here. And on this graphic, it is this temple and this temple here. And I think somebody is home, so I'm going to end this video, but stay tuned for further content.